Welcome back. Special counsel and Lawfare extraordinaire Jack Smith has re-indicted President Trump today in a 36-page indictment just published. He has indicted Trump for election subversion. Earlier this month, Smith requested an extension to plot how to move his own case forward and has ruled against the idea of a mini trial for Trump. Remember, he's had to do this because of this monumental ruling out of the Supreme Court. But at the same time, New York Supreme Court Judge Juan Merchan is floating the idea of delaying Trump's sentencing for the hush money trial. So what does all of this mean? How will this impact the election cycle? To break this all down, make sense of this lawfare, is attorney and political strategist Zach Worrell. Zach, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, how are you?
Oh, well, I'm a little bit going through a whirlwind because we're trying to track all these different efforts against Trump. And this latest story, that the superseding indictment that was returned today out of a grand jury in D.C., either changes things or it doesn't. I'm not sure. So that's why I wanted to ask you, what does all this mean? What does the superseding indictment actually do?
Right. So the superseding indictment, all it really does is trim away some of the problematic facts for the prosecution. So the Supreme Court ruled that anything done in the president's preclusive and exclusive authority cannot be the basis for criminal prosecution. And so the references to his efforts or involvement or involving the Justice Department were stripped out of the indictment, but all of the criminal charges remain intact. So all this really does is just remove some of the snags that they might have if and when they try to actually find him guilty, that the Supreme Court would knock down.
Well, doesn't this take all the bite, if you will, out of Jack Smith's efforts?
No, it doesn't. It's kind of in a sense, he lost kind of bigly, to quote 45 and 47, when the Supreme Court knocked down or came down with the decision about immunity.
Right.
And so he didn't have to remove any of the charges that were filed. It's just he removed some of the potentially problematic facts. And so in one sense, the step back has already happened. The Supreme Court decision was the blow. This is more just a reaction and a retooling of his approach.
Well, from a legal perspective, where does Jack Smith stand at this point? I mean, he has a highly politically charged case on his hands. He's got a lot of pressure on the left, I'm sure, to try and keep going with this. But he's clearly running into some strategic issues, not just from a legal standpoint, but also from a publicity standpoint. And one of the things that showed that he was having some issues was the fact that he turned down this mini trial offer, I guess. What does that actually mean? What does he mean? Why do you think he turned it down?
To be honest with you, I don't know the facts of that, and I don't want to opine on things that I'm ignorant about, but I can speak broadly to his overall efforts here. First, the judge has thrown out the documents case on the grounds, on a constitutional technicality. It's a novel legal argument, and a lot of people might say that it's wrong, but that's just a guess. There's no actual case law in the matter. So right now, as it stands, the document case is out. And in light of the immunity case, he's had to completely retool his approach on that, but that trial is not going to happen until after the election. So really what this is lawfare, not so much using the process as the punishment. This is more of a continued effort to get him, even though kind of the writing's on the wall on both of these indictments. There's no way he's going to go to trial on the documents case, and there's no way he's going to go to trial on this election subversion or whatever they're calling it case. So really, they're just burning up taxpayer resources to make Donald Trump have to spend more money, which is another aspect of implementing lawfare. Bleed your opponent.
Well, how do they also get around this argument that everything they're doing is essentially election interference? They're meddling with our elections. They're actively using government resources to harass a candidate for the U.S. presidential office. And I don't see how they're credibly able to rebuff accusations that this is just clean, clear election meddling from the left?
So they are convinced, as they have convinced a large number of people in this country, that they are doing the righteous thing. And so if you believe that you're part of a righteous cause, then you're going to continue to fight until all avenues are exhausted. And so while they may be too far in the weeds to see what's going on here, the American people are catching on. It's obvious these cases aren't moving forward. There's been no prosecutorial discretion. There are guns blazing, and they're going to continue this until the bitter end. And hopefully, Donald Trump wins re-election, and all of this nonsense will come to an end once and for all.
Oh, well, I certainly hope that's true. There's another story I wanted to highlight that's just such a appalling example of lawfare. And it has to do with a great-grandmother from Colorado has been slapped with a $103,000 fine and 12 months of probation for walking into the Capitol on January 6th. She said she briefly walked into the Capitol to say a prayer, and now, we have to be clear, she was not there hating cops, defiling the place, or threatening lawmakers. She went in to say a prayer, and she walked out. Countless J6 cases like this. But she's this one example. She's a great-grandmother, and she's slapped with this 6-figure fine. What are the grounds for their sentencing here?
Well, basically, they're trying to create this appearance that, we had the real Reichstag's fire on January 6th. Whether they're doing that intentionally or not, it's obvious to any observer that this really is a Reichstag fire here. Yes, there were people who were violent, who beat cops, who deserved to be punished, quite frankly. But this woman, she was standing in front of doors that were opened. She walked in. Nobody told her to leave. In fact, she had multiple conversations with officers that were in the building. And without being told to leave, she walked out. Now, the specifics of DC and federal law related to the buildings, I'm pretty sure there's no argument that you have to be told to leave. In fact, I think they're relying on a little no trespassing sign on one of the windows as kind of the notice necessary. But what they're trying to do here is get they're trying to get every single person they can with a criminal charge so that they can say, look, there were 500 or 750, whatever the number is, horrible people there that were sent there as a mob by Trump to burn down the Capitol and kill Pence or whatever nonsense. And so she's kind of caught in the crosshairs here. She's fodder for a narrative, really.
I mean, I hope the producers put a picture up of this woman, but if you look at her picture and she's standing there and she's having to pose for this shot, and they've got an ankle monitor on her leg. And this is clearly not the picture of an insurrectionist. And yet we have countless examples of lopsided justice here where you have individuals burning down buildings, throwing rocks inside businesses, looting, burning, murdering people. And those people don't seem to be getting this kind of treatment. And when the American people are looking at images like this little old grandma with her little red shoes having to walk around with a ankle monitor, it's sending a clear message that we do not have a justice system that represents all people.
That's exactly right. So it does two things. One, it sends a message that if you cross us, we're going to come at you with the full weight of the federal government. The other message that it sends, though it's not the one they intend, when they hand down these ridiculously punitive punishments for people who have done pretty much nothing wrong, who hasn't accidentally gone somewhere they weren't supposed to go and then left without being told. Like, I'm sure everybody in this audience has stepped foot on
the U.S. Capitol is the people's house. I mean, people walk in as tourists every single day. No, it's ridiculous. I'm very concerned. I'm very concerned that examples like this only stoke the fires of mistrust amongst the American people, and it's not a healthy place to be as a republic. But
that's exactly right.
On another, yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was going to say the other message that it sends that's not the one they're intending is it shows everybody that it's a sham, because you have somebody who has no guilty mind, no mens rea, no intent to do anything wrong, gets handed down a sentence that's way worse than a lot of the people that I've defended for other acts, for blatantly criminal acts. This poor old lady, great grandmother, as you mentioned, walked in, walked out, doors were open for her. She said hi to cops. Nobody told her to leave. And they're giving her this very harsh sentence. And the lack of prosecutorial discretion here sends the message that we're coming after you. In a situation like this, usually the charges would be dropped and they'd go after the real bad actors here, but they are leaving absolutely nobody who even came close to a foul of a rule to walk away. And that's not the point here. When you have so many laws on the books, you can get anybody guilty of anything.
What happens if she can't actually pay that $103,000 fine?
It will probably continue to increase, and she may be thrown in jail on contempt.
Unbelievable. Well, another Lawfare story I have on here is in Arizona. An Arizona judge has set a 2026 trial date for a case that we've kind of been watching on the sidelines. It's a case against President Trump's allies, accusing them of trying to overturn the 2020 election. One of those parties is a former colleague of mine, Christina Bobb. Trump was not charged in any way in this case in Arizona. But how will this case be impacted if indeed Trump is back in the White House? Can this be thrown out if the allies are pardoned? What happens with a case like this if it runs out of political steam?
Right. So what happened is Katie Hobbs and the Democrats won the power in Arizona. And so these are state level charges. And so the federal government, the president, can't do anything to pardon these people for the state charges. And the whole thing is predicated on this notion that by preparing for the eventuality that the Arizona legislature would somehow modify the results, which in theory it could happen, they prepared the paperwork necessary to be certified delegates. In 1960, there was a contested election in Hawaii where Nixon originally won by, I think, 141 votes. And after recounts, after the safe harbor deadline in the Electoral College Act, it turned out that Nixon had won. Well, guess what? The unofficial Democratic delegates filed the paperwork, sent it to everybody, and eventually the Democratic delegates were the ones that were granted the vote. And so to go after people who are doing something that has a very clear precedent in American history, they didn't defraud anybody. I checked the statutes. Reliance, meaning if I lie to you and you act on that lie, that's usually fraud. In this case, you don't have to have the other person act on it. So basically, they're saying by filling out the paperwork saying that we are the delegates in the event that they became the delegates is a criminal act. It's just ridiculous. And this is another example. So the first instance that we talked about was going after Trump personally with Lawfare. The second instance was going after his supporters to send the message. And this one is going after his close advisors. And so, the whole election interference case in Arizona is predicated on this theory that you can't pursue a legal argument until it's exhausted, because if you do, then we're going to criminalize your behavior, even though your behavior has clear precedent in history that was not at all controversial until recently. In fact, I haven't heard anybody complain about the Hawaii 1960 Hawaii delegation. Have you? No.
No, this is the first time I'm hearing of it. I'm glad you brought it up. But if you look at this case out of Arizona, I mean, it's so incompetently written too. I don't know what lawyer would have put their names on this document, but it was not well done. And I've spoken to other lawyers too who look at this document itself and say this is purely an example of people who are out there trying to ride this lawfare wave. And it's a tragedy because it has real world consequences on real people.
Right. And so there's, this might be too wonky, but America separated the legislature from the judicial branch. In England, the legislature is inside of the judicial branch. And because of that constitutional separation, the legislatures thought that they had prerogative. And so we've passed a huge number of laws, criminal and otherwise, that now are being used by a weaponized judicial system to go after people for any and everything. And the problem is it's the selective enforcement. So the first problem is there are too many laws that can get you in trouble, almost anyone in trouble for almost anything. And then it's the selective enforcement.
On a daily basis.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And the selective enforcement is what gives it the real problem. If they weren't enforcing the laws, that's one thing. But the problem is they are enforcing it, but they're not enforcing it uniformly. They're enforcing it with a political angle to it, and that's what qualifies it as lawfare. And so this is you cannot
Amazing.
disentangle the politics from the law here, and it is weaponizing the judicial system for non-justice seeking ends. Lawfare.
It's a great tragedy in terms of the direction of this country, and I hope that we can rectify it sooner than later. Zachary Worrell, always a pleasure, always an informative chat with you. Thank you so much. We'll be right back with Mark My Words. Don't go anywhere.